My name is Gloria, and at 65 years old, I never imagined I would be standing in my son's living room clutching a dust rag while my daughter-in-law shouted those humiliating words in front of a room full of guests. She pointed her manicured finger directly at me and declared to everyone that I was just the cleaning lady. What none of them knew, including my own son, was that they were about to discover exactly who I really was and what I truly owned. Before we dive into this story, I would love to know where you are watching from today. Please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories like this one. Have you ever been underestimated or judged by someone who had no idea who you really were? Let me know in the comments below, and now let me tell you about the day everything changed. Let me take you back to where this all began. For 38 years, I was married to my beloved husband, Richard. We built our real estate company from absolutely nothing, working 18-hour days, sleeping on air mattresses in our first tiny office, and eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner more nights than I care to remember. Richard had this incredible vision for what our company could become, and together we turned that dream into reality. Richard and Associates grew into one of the most successful real estate firms in our city. We owned prime commercial properties, luxury residential developments, and had a client list that included some of the wealthiest families in the state. Our company was worth millions, and we had earned every single dollar through blood, sweat, and countless sacrifices. 2 years ago, Richard suffered a massive stroke while reviewing contracts at his desk. He was gone within hours, leaving me heartbroken and completely lost. We had been partners in everything for nearly 4 decades, and suddenly I was facing the world alone. According to his will, which we had carefully crafted together, the entire company was to be transferred to our son Michael when he turned 35. Michael is now 35 years old, and he received control of the business 6 months after his father's death. What he does not know, what nobody knows, except our family attorney, is that I made the decision to let everyone believe I was just Richard's wife, who happened to inherit a modest pension. I wanted Michael to prove himself, to earn his position through hard work rather than simply riding on his father's coattails. So while Michael thinks his mother is struggling to get by on Social Security and a small savings account, the truth is that I still own 40% of Richard and Associates. I also personally own the beautiful 4-bedroom house where Michael lives with his family, the luxury cars in their driveway, and I have been quietly paying many of their expenses for months. Michael married Stephanie 3 years ago. She is 32, a former flight attendant who was immediately drawn to what she perceived as Michael's wealth and success. Stephanie is tall, blonde, and carries herself with the kind of confidence that comes from always getting what she wants. She treats our family home like her personal kingdom, redecorating constantly and throwing elaborate parties to impress her social circle. After Richard died, I made the decision to spend more time with my 5-year-old granddaughter, Emma. I began coming over several times a week to help with household tasks, cooking, and childcare. What started as a grandmother wanting to be useful gradually became something else entirely. Stephanie began treating me less like family and more like hired help. Michael works long hours at the company, often traveling for major deals, so he rarely witnesses how Stephanie speaks to me when we are alone. She has developed a habit of leaving me lists of chores, criticizing my cleaning methods, and making comments about how I should be grateful they let me help out, since I clearly need something to keep me busy. The irony is almost unbearable. I am scrubbing the floors of a house that I purchased. I am organizing closets filled with clothes bought with money that ultimately flows from my business. I am preparing meals in a kitchen that exists because of my financial support. And through it all, Stephanie treats me like I am some charity case who should be thankful for the opportunity to serve her family. The morning of Emma's 5th birthday party, I arrived at the house at 7 o'clock to help with preparations. Stephanie had planned an elaborate celebration with a princess theme, complete with decorations, entertainment, and a guest list of 12 families from Emma's preschool. These were not just any families, these were the wealthy elite of our community. The guest list included Sarah, whose husband owns the largest law firm in the city, Linda, who runs an exclusive art gallery, and Jennifer, whose physician husband is one of the most respected surgeons in the region. I had barely walked through the front door when Stephanie cornered me in the kitchen. Her voice was sharp and demanding as she handed me a detailed list of tasks that needed to be completed before the guests arrived at 2 o'clock. The list included cleaning every bathroom in the house, vacuuming all the carpets, polishing the hardwood floors, organizing the garage, and preparing several elaborate appetizer trays. "I need everything to be absolutely perfect today," Stephanie said, not even looking at me as she applied her makeup at the kitchen island. "These people have very high standards, and I cannot have anything looking out of place. I hope you understand how important this is for Michael's reputation and our social standing." What she did not mention, what she never mentions, is that I had quietly paid for almost everything related to this party. The expensive decorations, the professional princess entertainer, the elaborate 3-tiered cake from the city's most exclusive bakery, even the new dress that Emma was wearing. I had transferred money into their account the previous week, just as I do every month, to cover expenses that they believe Michael's salary is handling. As the morning progressed, Stephanie's demands became increasingly unreasonable. She criticized the way I folded the napkins, complained that I was moving too slowly, and made several comments about how lucky I was to have something meaningful to do with my time. At one point, she actually suggested that I should consider getting a real job cleaning houses, since I seemed to enjoy the work so much. I bit my tongue and continued working because my focus was entirely on Emma. My granddaughter was so excited about her party, running around the house in her beautiful pink dress, telling me about all the friends who would be coming to celebrate with her. She had specifically requested that I make my famous chocolate chip cookies, and she wanted me to stay for the entire party so I could meet all her friends. By noon, the house was absolutely spotless, and the food preparations were complete. I had transformed their home into a princess wonderland, with pink and purple streamers balloons arranged in perfect clusters, and a dessert table that looked like something from a magazine. Stephanie walked through the rooms inspecting my work with the critical eye of someone who had never cleaned anything herself. When the first guests began arriving at 2 o'clock, I retreated to the kitchen to finish arranging the appetizer platters. I could hear Stephanie greeting everyone in the living room, accepting compliments on the beautiful decorations and the obviously expensive setup. What made my stomach turn was listening to her take credit for everything, describing in detail how much effort she had put into planning every aspect of the celebration. As the afternoon progressed, I stayed busy in the background, refilling snack bowls, cleaning up spills, and making sure everything ran smoothly. The party was a huge success. Emma was absolutely glowing as she played games with her friends, and the other parents seemed genuinely impressed with the elaborate setup and attention to detail. I was in the dining room quietly wiping down surfaces and collecting empty plates when I overheard several of the mothers talking about Stephanie. They were praising her organizational skills, her decorating abilities, and her obvious dedication to making Emma's birthday special. Sarah mentioned how impressed she was with the homemade cookies, and Linda commented on the professional quality of the food presentation. What hurt was not just that Stephanie was taking credit for my work, but that she seemed to be enjoying the deception. She was basking in the admiration of these influential women, building her reputation on the foundation of my efforts and my financial investment. I had spent weeks planning this party, I had paid for everything, and I had worked since dawn to make it perfect. But according to everyone in that room, Stephanie was the amazing mother and hostess who had created this magical day for her daughter. Emma, sweet and innocent, as only a 5-year-old can be kept trying to give me credit. She told her friends that Grandma Gloria had made the cookies they were eating, that I had helped hang all the decorations, and that I had been working all day to make her party special. But every time Emma mentioned my contributions, Stephanie would quickly redirect the conversation or distract the children with another activity. Around 4 o'clock, most of the guests had moved into the backyard, where a professional entertainer was performing a puppet show. I was alone in the kitchen washing dishes and putting away leftover food when Jennifer approached me. She spoke to me with the kind of polite but distant tone that wealthy people often use when talking to service workers. "You have done such a wonderful job today," she said, clearly assuming I was hired help. "Stephanie is so lucky to have found someone as thorough and reliable as you. It is so hard to find good domestic help these days. I hope she is treating you well and paying you fairly for all this hard work." I simply smiled and thanked her, not correcting her assumption about my role in the household. What was I supposed to say? That I was actually the woman funding this entire lifestyle, that I owned the house she was standing in, that my deceased husband and I had built the business empire that was paying for her to sip wine and eat expensive appetizers while treating me like the hired staff. The breaking point was approaching, and I could feel it building in my chest like a storm that had been gathering strength for months. All the condescending comments, all the taken credit, all the assumptions about who I was and what I deserved were about to culminate in a moment that would change everything forever. The moment that shattered my heart into 1,000 pieces happened at exactly 4:30 in the afternoon. I was carrying a stack of dirty plates from the dining room to the kitchen when I heard Stephanie's voice rise above the conversation in the living room. Several of the mothers had gathered around her, and they were discussing household management and the challenges of maintaining such a beautiful home while managing work and family responsibilities. Sarah was asking Stephanie how she managed to keep everything so perfectly organized, and Linda wanted to know her secret for hosting such flawless events. That was when Stephanie decided to explain her system, and her explanation included a casual, dismissive reference to me that made my blood run cold. "Oh, it is really not that difficult when you have good help," Stephanie said with a laugh that sounded light and carefree to everyone else, but felt like a knife in my chest. "I am very fortunate to have consistent domestic support. It makes all the difference in maintaining our lifestyle and keeping Michael free to focus on his demanding career." Jennifer asked if she could recommend her cleaning service, and that was when Stephanie turned and pointed directly at me as I stood in the doorway between the kitchen and living room, holding a stack of plates and wearing an apron covered in birthday cake frosting. "She's just the cleaning lady," Stephanie announced to the room full of guests, her voice carrying that particular tone of dismissive superiority that wealthy people sometimes use when discussing their staff. "But she does excellent work, and she is very reliable. I really cannot complain about the quality of her service." The words hit me like a physical blow. Every person in that room turned to look at me, and I could see the mixture of pity and awkward discomfort in their expressions. Some of them looked embarrassed on my behalf, others seemed to be evaluating my appearance and wondering about my circumstances, and a few actually looked away, as if my presence was somehow uncomfortable or inappropriate. Sarah whispered something to Linda about how sad it was that elderly women had to continue working at my age. Jennifer made a comment about hoping Stephanie was paying me fairly since I was clearly working very hard. Michael, my own son, was standing right there in the room. He heard every word his wife said about me, saw the humiliating way she had just reduced me to nothing more than hired help in front of all these people, and he said absolutely nothing. Michael just stood there with an uncomfortable smile on his face, neither defending me nor correcting his wife's characterization of who I was. He avoided making eye contact with me, and I realized in that horrible moment that he was actually embarrassed by my presence. He was allowing these people to believe that his mother was some desperate old woman who cleaned houses for money, and he was not going to do anything to correct that impression. Little Emma, my precious granddaughter, who had been playing in the corner with her new toys, heard the commotion and came running over to me. She wrapped her small arms around my legs and looked up at me with concern in her big brown eyes. "Why does everyone look sad, Grandma Gloria?" she asked in her sweet 5-year-old voice. "Are you okay?" That was the moment when something fundamental shifted inside me. Standing there in my own house, surrounded by people who were judging me based on completely false assumptions, while my son remained silent and my daughter-in-law basked in the credit for everything I had provided, I made a decision that would change all of our lives forever. The time for hiding the truth had come to an end. That evening, after the guests had all left and the house had been cleaned up, I went home to the modest apartment where everyone believed I lived. In reality, I own a beautiful townhouse in the most exclusive neighborhood in the city, but I had been maintaining the fiction of reduced circumstances as part of my plan to let Michael prove himself independently. Tonight, however, I knew that plan had to change. I called David Chen, who had been our family attorney for over 20 years and had handled all of Richard's estate planning. David had been trying to convince me for months that I should be more open with Michael about the true extent of my financial situation and my ongoing ownership stake in the company. Tonight, I was finally ready to listen to his advice. "David, I need you to prepare all the paperwork for a complete restructuring of our arrangement," I said as soon as he answered the phone. I want full documentation of my ownership stake in Richard & Associates' complete financial statements showing all the payments I have been making on Michael's behalf, and I want everything prepared to execute a transfer of assets back to my direct control." David was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Gloria, are you certain about this? Once you reveal the true situation, there is no going back to the way things have been. This will fundamentally change your relationship with Michael and his family." I told David about what had happened at the party, about the way Stephanie had humiliated me in front of their friends, and about Michael's complete failure to defend me or correct the false impression of who I was. I explained that I had reached the point where maintaining this deception was causing me more pain than it was worth, and that I needed to reclaim my dignity and my rightful position in my own family. Over the next week, I continued my routine of going to Michael's house to help with household tasks. But everything felt different now. Every time Stephanie handed me a list of chores, every time she criticized my work, every time she spoke to me like I was some unfortunate person who should be grateful for the opportunity to serve her family, I was counting down the days until our final confrontation. During this week, I also contacted Margaret Thompson, who manages my investment portfolio and personal financial accounts. I instructed her to prepare a complete accounting of all the money I had been transferring to support Michael's lifestyle, including the house payments, car payments, insurance premiums, and monthly expense supplements. The total amount was staggering even to me. Stephanie seemed to sense that something had changed in my attitude, although she could not identify exactly what it was. She became even more demanding and critical, as if she was testing the limits of what she could get away with. She started leaving me increasingly unreasonable lists of tasks and making comments about how I should appreciate having something productive to do with my retirement years. Michael remained oblivious to the tension building in his household. He was completely absorbed in negotiating a major commercial real estate deal that would bring millions of dollars in commission to the company. The irony was not lost on me that he was working so hard to impress me as the owner of the company without realizing that I was the person he was ultimately trying to please. Emma continued to be the bright spot in this increasingly difficult situation. She would always greet me with hugs and excitement, tell me about her day at preschool, and ask me to read her favorite stories. She had no understanding of the adult tensions swirling around her, and I was determined to protect her innocence for as long as possible. By Friday morning, exactly 1 week after the birthday party incident, all the legal paperwork was prepared, and I was ready to have the conversation that would change everything. David had prepared a comprehensive package that documented my true financial position, my ownership of the house and cars, my stake in the business, and my legal right to reclaim direct control of all these assets. Friday morning, I dressed very differently than I had been dressing for my visits to Michael's house. Instead of my usual casual clothes and apron, I put on a tailored black business suit that I had not worn since Richard's funeral. I styled my hair professionally, applied makeup carefully, and chose jewelry that reflected my actual financial status, rather than the modest persona I had been maintaining. When I arrived at the house at 8 o'clock, Michael and Stephanie were having breakfast with Emma before Michael left for work, and Stephanie took Emma to preschool. The moment I walked into the kitchen, I could see the surprise and confusion on their faces. Stephanie looked me up and down with obvious bewilderment, clearly wondering why I was dressed so formally. "Are you going somewhere special today?" Stephanie asked with that slightly mocking tone she often used when speaking to me. "Do you have some kind of appointment? I hope you are not planning to leave early because I have a very long list of things that need to be done around here today." Michael was reading emails on his phone while eating cereal, barely paying attention to the conversation happening around him. Emma was focused on her pancakes, occasionally looking up to smile at me with the unconditional love that only grandchildren can provide. The ordinary domestic scene was about to be shattered forever. I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick envelope that David had prepared for me. The envelope contained legal documents, financial statements, property deeds, and a complete accounting of the true ownership structure of everything Michael believed he had earned or inherited. I placed the envelope on the kitchen table directly in front of my son. "Michael," I said in a voice that was calm, but carried an authority that neither he nor Stephanie had ever heard from me before. "I think it is time for you to understand who your mother really is and what I actually own." Michael looked up from his phone with mild curiosity, clearly not sensing the magnitude of what was about to happen. He picked up the envelope and began pulling out the documents, his expression gradually changing from casual interest to confusion to complete shock as he realized what he was reading. Stephanie tried to grab the papers from his hands, her voice rising with indignation as she scanned the legal language and financial figures. "What is this? What are these papers supposed to mean? This has to be some kind of mistake or misunderstanding." "There is no mistake," I replied, looking directly at Stephanie for the first time with complete confidence and authority. "Every document in that envelope is completely accurate and legally binding. Perhaps you would like to sit down while I explain exactly what you have just learned about your cleaning lady." Emma sensed the tension in the room and stopped eating her pancakes, looking back and forth between the adults with wide, concerned eyes. Michael's face had gone completely pale as he continued reading through the documents, occasionally stopping to stare at numbers that were clearly much larger than anything he had expected to see. The next 30 minutes completely transformed the power dynamic in that kitchen and in our family forever. I explained to Michael and Stephanie that I was not a struggling widow living on Social Security and a small pension. I was actually one of the wealthiest women in our city, with a net worth that exceeded anything they had imagined possible. Richard and Associates. The company that Michael believed he had inherited and was now running independently was still 40% owned by me. The beautiful house where they lived, which Michael thought had been left to him in his father's will, was actually titled in my name and had been purchased with my money. The luxury cars in their driveway, the expensive furniture throughout the house, the designer clothes in Stephanie's closets, all of it had been paid for with funds that I had been quietly transferring to support their lifestyle. The monthly deposits that appeared in their bank account, which Michael assumed were profits from the business or insurance payments from Richard's death, were actually direct transfers from my personal accounts. I had been subsidizing their entire standard of living for over a year, allowing them to live far beyond what Michael's salary could actually support. Stephanie was staring at the financial documents with her mouth open, clearly trying to process the implications of what she was learning. The woman she had been treating like hired help, the person she had humiliated in front of their wealthy friends, was actually the source of everything she had been enjoying and taking credit for. Michael kept apologizing over and over, saying he had no idea, explaining that he thought I needed the help and the sense of purpose that came from taking care of their household. But as I looked at my son, I realized that his apologies felt hollow because he had never once stood up for me when Stephanie treated me poorly, and he had been completely comfortable allowing people to believe his mother was nothing more than domestic help. The most heartbreaking part of this entire situation, I told them both, is not that you were unaware of my financial situation. The most painful thing is that you were both perfectly comfortable treating someone you believed was struggling and vulnerable with such disrespect and condescension. Whether I was a wealthy woman or a poor woman should not have determined how I deserved to be treated by my own family. I informed them that I would be taking immediate control of the house, the cars, and the financial accounts. I explained that Michael could continue working for the company, but he would now be working as my employee rather than as the owner he had believed himself to be. I told them they had 2 weeks to find alternative housing arrangements and to begin adjusting to a lifestyle that matched Michael's actual earning capacity rather than the inflated standard of living I had been secretly funding. Stephanie's reaction was immediate and explosive. She began screaming about unfairness, about how she had married Michael because of his financial prospects, and about how I had no right to change the arrangements now. She actually accused me of fraud and deception, apparently not recognizing the irony of these accusations coming from someone who had been taking credit for my work and my money for months. Then Stephanie made the threat that revealed her true character completely. She told me that if I went through with this plan, she would divorce Michael immediately and take Emma away from all of us. She would demand alimony and child support that would bankrupt Michael, and she would make sure that I never saw my granddaughter again. That was when I delivered the final piece of information that completed Stephanie's understanding of her actual position. I pulled out one more document from my purse, a copy of the prenuptial agreement that Stephanie had signed before marrying Michael. The agreement, which had been carefully crafted by David's law firm, specified that in the event of divorce, Stephanie would receive no alimony and no claim to any assets that had been in Michael's possession prior to the marriage or acquired through family inheritance. Since everything Stephanie thought Michael owned was actually mine, and since I had been the source of their comfortable lifestyle throughout their marriage, she would be entitled to essentially nothing in a divorce settlement. The cars would be returned to me, the house would remain mine, and she would leave the marriage with only her personal belongings and whatever modest savings she had accumulated from her part-time work. Emma started crying because the adults were raising their voices, and she could sense that something terrible was happening to her family. I immediately went to comfort her, kneeling down to her level and explaining in gentle terms that Grandma Gloria and Mommy and Daddy needed to have some grown-up conversations, but that she was safe and loved no matter what happened. 3 months have passed since that morning in the kitchen, when I revealed the truth about our family's financial situation. The changes in our lives have been dramatic, but I can honestly say that I feel more at peace now than I have felt since Richard died. Living authentically, even when it is difficult, has brought me a sense of freedom that I had forgotten was possible. Michael and Stephanie's marriage ended within 6 weeks of our confrontation. Once Stephanie realized that there would be no financial benefit to remaining married to Michael, and once she understood that her comfortable lifestyle had been entirely dependent on my generosity rather than Michael's success, she quickly decided that divorce was her best option for starting fresh with someone else. The divorce proceedings were actually quite simple thanks to the prenuptial agreement. Stephanie moved out of the house with her personal belongings and a small settlement that I voluntarily provided, not because she was entitled to it, but because I wanted the process to conclude quickly and with minimal trauma for Emma. Within a month, Stephanie had relocated to another city where she is pursuing what she describes as new opportunities. Michael was devastated by the failure of his marriage, but he has also begun to understand how his passive acceptance of Stephanie's behavior contributed to the problems in our family. He has started therapy to work on his tendency to avoid conflict and his difficulty standing up for the people he loves when it might create tension in his relationships. Most importantly, Michael and I have been rebuilding our relationship based on honesty and mutual respect. He continues to work for Richard and Associates, but now he fully understands that he is an employee rather than an owner, and he is working to prove that he deserves the leadership position through his performance rather than through inheritance. I have been impressed with his dedication and his growing maturity as he faces the reality of supporting himself independently. The custody arrangement for Emma has worked out better than I had dared to hope. Since Stephanie moved away and has shown little interest in maintaining regular contact with her daughter, Michael has primary custody, and I have Emma every weekend and during most school vacations. This arrangement has allowed me to develop an even closer relationship with my granddaughter, and she seems to be thriving with the increased stability and attention. I sold the large house where Michael's family had been living and purchased a smaller but elegant townhouse that is perfect for Emma and me to share during our time together. Emma has her own beautifully decorated bedroom, and we have created wonderful new traditions around our weekend adventures and cooking projects. She loves helping me bake cookies and learning about the business world that her grandfather and I built together. I have also returned to active involvement in the charitable organizations that Richard and I supported during our marriage. I am using my time and resources to fund scholarships for young entrepreneurs, support programs for widows who are struggling financially, and contribute to organizations that help children from broken families. This work has given me a sense of purpose and connection that I had been missing during the months when I was pretending to be someone I was not. The most important lesson I have learned from this entire experience is that authenticity and self-respect are not luxuries that we can afford to sacrifice for the sake of keeping peace or avoiding difficult conversations. When we allow others to treat us poorly, we are not just hurting ourselves, we are also enabling them to become worse versions of themselves than they need to be. I spent months accepting disrespectful treatment because I thought I was protecting my family relationships and giving Michael space to grow into his responsibilities. What I actually did was create a dynamic where my son became comfortable with allowing his wife to humiliate his mother, and where my daughter-in-law felt entitled to take credit for work and generosity that was not her own. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do for our families is to insist on being treated with the respect and dignity that every person deserves. Sometimes we have to be willing to disrupt comfortable illusions in order to build relationships that are based on truth rather than convenience or deception. Looking back now, I can see that the woman who stood in that kitchen 3 months ago, silently accepting being called just the cleaning lady, was not really protecting anyone or anything valuable. She was just enabling a pattern of behavior that was harmful to everyone involved, including the people who thought they were benefiting from it. Today, I am proud to be Gloria's successful businesswoman, devoted grandmother, and generous philanthropist. I am no longer hiding my accomplishments or pretending to be less than I am in order to make other people comfortable. My relationships are healthier, my days are more fulfilling, and my granddaughter is learning from my example that women can be strong, independent, and confident while still being loving and generous. The truth really can set us free, but sometimes we have to be brave enough to insist that others see us as we truly are, rather than as they would prefer us to be. Have you ever been in a situation where someone underestimated you or treated you poorly because they made assumptions about who you were? Have you ever had to make the difficult decision to reveal a truth that you knew would change your relationships forever? I would love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories about family dynamics, personal growth, and finding the courage to live authentically. Share this video with someone who might need to hear the message that they deserve to be treated with respect, regardless of their circumstances. Thank you for listening to my story today, and I hope it reminds you that your worth is not determined by other people's perceptions or assumptions. You have the right to be seen and valued for who you truly are. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to accept being treated as less than you deserve.